Ladies and gentlemen, could you take your seats now? We will be starting shortly. I have a slightly longer than usual administrative announcement to make this morning because of certain issues we have with this afternoon's witness. So I'd be grateful if you could listen. Before we begin, please note that no electronic equipment may be used in this room by media or members of the public at any time during the hearing. Nominated members of inquiry staff and legal teams at legal benches are permitted to do so to assist with their work. The use of laptops, texting and tweeting is permitted in the annex. A stream feed of the proceedings can be viewed in the annex, subject to a 3-minute delay. Should you need to leave the hearing room, please do so quietly and through the public entry over there. Hearing centre staff are ready to help you should you require assistance or directions. Should you find inquiry proceedings distressing, we have inquiry support workers in the hearing room and in the annex available for confidential discussions in private rooms. Can I ask the support workers to indicate their whereabouts, please? Well, hopefully there will be some at some point. Eating and drinking other than water are not permitted in this room. A transcript of proceedings will be on the website later today. Proceedings will also be streamed live to the inquiry website and a recording will be made available later. In the event of an emergency, staff will immediately direct you to a safe place. Participants, when contributing to the discussion, before you speak, please switch on the microphone in front of you and speak clearly, and switch it off when you've finished. A green light shows the microphone is active. When the panel rise at breaks or lunchtime, please remain in your seats until the chair and panel have left the hearing room. At lunchtime, we ask that you clear the room. Now, this afternoon we do have an anonymous witness giving evidence by video link. The chairman has directed certain provisions which will apply to the evidence given by this witness. There will be no streaming of this afternoon's witness evidence to the website. The audio and transcript will be streamed to the annex, and the transcript will be published on the website at the end of the hearing, but there will be no video or audio recordings of this witness's evidence available on the website. Those present in the hearing room will be able to hear the witness evidence in real time and view the transcript, but only the panel and counsel to inquiry will be able to see the witness. Those in the annex will hear the evidence and view the transcript subject to the 3-minute delay. The usual rules will apply to the use of electronic equipment. In the hearing room, legal team members may use electronic equipment to assist with their work. Those in the public gallery may not use electronic equipment or mobile phones, and in the annex, electronic equipment may be used to text or tweet as you wish. However, the chair has issued a notice prohibiting the recording of this witness's evidence. Any attempt to record the evidence will be an offence under the Inquiries Act. If anyone has any queries or concerns about these arrangements, please contact the inquiry solicitor or investigation lawyer if you are a member of the legal team, press office if you are from the media, or to an usher or myself if you are a member of the public. And may I also say to members of legal teams, this afternoon, once you have taken your seats, you will not be permitted to leave your seat or move about the room except during an appropriate break in proceedings. If there is an emergency and you need to do so, please attract the attention of an usher or myself and we will make appropriate arrangements. I will repeat that all at lunchtime. Thank you very much.
Please sit. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second week of this public inquiry. Mr. O'Connor.
Good morning, Chair. Our first witness this morning is Frances Mowett, and as you can see, she is giving evidence by video link. Perhaps if I can just establish that we can both hear each other, and then I'll ask for her to be sworn. Mrs. Mowett, good morning. Can you hear me?
I can.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the usher to swear you now.
Good morning again. I understand you're going to swear on the Bible. Could you please take the Bible in your right hand? Lovely. And if you repeat after me, please. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God
That the evidence I shall give.
that the evidence I shall give
Shall be the truth.
shall be the truth,
The whole truth.
the whole truth,
And nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
That's lovely. Thank you very much.
Could you give us your full name, please, Mrs. Mowett?
My full name is Doreen Frances Mowett.
Now, Mrs. Mowett, I know that you've had the procedure for this morning explained to you. I'm going to ask you some questions first, and when I've finished, the chair and panel may have some questions for you. And you've got a bundle of documents in front of you, mainly witness statements, and the chair and panel have got the same bundles in front of them. So if I ask you to look at some documents, we'll be looking at the same documents here in court. Do you understand?
Just a minute. Thank you, yes.
And if you have if there are any problems with the equipment, Mrs. Mowett, or if for any other reason you just need to take a short break, just say so, and we'll have a break. Do you understand?
Thank you.
Now, just a few questions about background first, Mrs. Mowett. You now live in Essex, don't you?
I do.
But previously, you lived and worked in Chester.
I didn't live in Chester, but I worked in Chester.
We don't need to know exactly where you lived, but you lived just outside, I think.
About 23 miles, yes.
And when you lived outside Chester, you moved there, I think, or at least you started working for the City of Chester Conservative Association in 1975.
That's correct.
And what was your job, what was the title of your job at that time?
I was the agent and secretary to the City of Chester Conservative Association.
Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about what that job involved, but did that remain your job for some time until you left Chester, I think, in 1988?
Yes, the beginning of 1988. With additions to my responsibilities, the job was basically the same.
You've said that that job started in 1975, and at that time, Peter Morrison was the MP for Chester, wasn't he?
He was?
I think he was first elected the year before, in 1974.
Yes, indeed.
And he remained the MP throughout the time that you were there. He was still the MP when you left in 1988.
Yes, he was.
Now, you mentioned that part of your title and part of your job being the election agent for the Chester Conservative Association. That role has some very specific responsibilities, particularly at the time of a general election, doesn't it?
Yes.
For example, responsibilities relating to campaign financing.
Yes, I had to raise a fighting fund to cover all expenses of the election.
And was it also part of your responsibility to account for the way in which that money had been spent?
Yes, I was responsible for making a return of election expenses within the due timetable.
And you were aware of all those responsibilities of being an election agent at the time that you did that job?
Yes, indeed. It was organising voluntary workers for victory.
And having started in 1975, Mrs. Mowett, I think it's right to say that you fought or were involved in fighting 3 general elections during your time in Chester.
That is so, yes.
And those would have been the elections in 1979, 1983, and lastly 1987.
Correct.
And the 1987 election was also Mr. Morrison's last election. He didn't fight the 1992 election, did he?
I believe not.
Can you remember, Mrs. Mowett, when you found out that Mr. Morrison didn't intend to fight the 1992 election?
I heard about it when the vacancy was published in 1991.
In other words, after you had left Chester?
Several years.
I wondered whether you'd found out earlier than that, even perhaps during the 1987 election. Did Mr. Morrison perhaps tell you privately that that was going to be his last election and he wasn't going to stand again?
No, he didn't.
Can you give us an idea of your relationship with Mr. Morrison, please, Mrs. Mowett? You worked with him for some time. How did you get on with him?
We got on very well, professionally, that is. He was a very good constituency member of Parliament. For him, nothing was too much trouble for everyone who approached him for help. The professions in the city, business and commerce, greatly admired him, not only his diligence, but for everything that he achieved in the city of Chester. He was a very popular member of Parliament. I knew nothing of Westminster, where he lived, worked and socialised.
Mrs. Mowett, Mr. Morrison obviously spent a fair amount of his time in Westminster, in the House of Commons.
He did, and he was also from, I think it was 1986, he was Vice Chairman and was in Conservative Central Office.
And would it be fair to say that part of your job between elections was looking after the interests of the Conservative Party and also Mr. Morrison's interests, political interests, in Chester while he was down in London?
Yes, largely, of course, on an annual basis, we would have local government elections in what was then the Chester Corporation, and also the County Council elections, and I was also looking after the interests of the Cheshire West European Member of Parliament and, of course, Mr. Morrison.
But you mentioned a moment ago that Mr. Morrison was popular in Chester, and you gave some examples of different areas within society, different groups of people who found him to be a good MP. Was that part of your job, if you like, improving his image and talking to people on his behalf in Chester?
No, that wasn't my role. The voluntary workers, I had branches in every one of the local government areas. The voluntary workers were very keen to promote Mr. Morrison, and I kept records mainly of their work.
I just want to ask you about a few other people and just ask whether you knew them. First of all, a man called David Robinson, who I think was initially a Labour Party agent and then became the candidate in the 1987 election, the Labour candidate. Do you remember him?
I remember him being the Labour candidate at the 1987 election.
I'm going to ask you some questions about him in a moment, but just moving on, do you remember Christine Russell?
Yes, Christine Russell, I think she was his agent.
In the Labour Party?
I never met her.
I see.
Yes, in the Labour Party, yes.
And what about Graham Nichols, Mrs. Mowett?
I knew of him. I think he was the Trades Council and the National Union of Public Employees representative, but I never met him.
You never met him in all the years that you were in Chester and doing that job?
I never met him ever.
You've already mentioned, Mrs. Mowett, that you moved away from Chester, and that was the time that you moved to Essex, wasn't it? And you've said it was after the 1987 election.
Yes.
Did you say a moment ago that it was in, did you say early 1988?
Yes, I can't remember exactly when it was. Because I was asked, I travelled backwards and forwards because I was headhunted to go to the Essex South West Euro constituency in the run-up to the 1989 European elections, so that I was backwards and forwards too, but I was never employed by the Billericay Conservative Association.
Well, let's as far as the date is concerned, let's not worry about the exact date. It was sometime in 1988, was it?
It was, yeah. Yes.
And I was going to ask you what prompted the move, Mrs. Mowett, and I think you may have already given us some of the answer to that question.
Yes, happily, over the 50 years that I have conducted parliamentary elections, I developed a reputation for winning those elections, and I was headhunted to come down to Essex with the specific job of securing the return of a Conservative member to the European Parliament as the then existing Member of Parliament was retiring.
So you've explained why the people down in Essex wanted you to move down there. Was there anything that may have happened in Chester that made you want to leave Chester?
No.
Once you had moved down to Essex, and you've described a period when you were back and forth, did you carry on having anything to do with Chester affairs after you'd finally moved to Essex?
I encouraged fundraising because we had a constituency office to support, and so it was more on the social side.
Mrs. Mowett, I'm going to ask you to look at a couple of documents now, but before I do, let me ask you this. The Chair and panel are going to hear evidence this morning about rumours about Peter Morrison that circulated in Chester during the time that he was an MP. What can you tell us about what you heard about rumours about Peter Morrison's sexual life or private life during that time?
I didn't hear any rumours about either his... What did you describe it? Sexual? And...
the words I used were... I asked you about rumours about his sexual life or his private life.
No, I didn't hear any rumours during the time that I was in Chester.
Let me just take you to one document, Mrs. Mowett, and I think it's in tab 6 in your bundle. It will be for the Chair and panel. The reference is LAB 4037. It's the witness... It's the witness statement of Christine Russell, Mrs. Mowett. Do you have that?
Yes, I have.
And if we can...
I've got copy back in my hand, yes.
Right.
There is a section of that which I only read this morning when the hard copies were brought to me.
All right, well, let's look at a passage of it together, Mrs. Mowett. It's on page 3 of the statement, paragraph 6.
6, yes.
And it's just the first sentence or so. Mrs. Russell says, Chester was awash with rumours about Peter Morrison's private life, his alcoholism and penchant for young men from the early 1980s onwards. Now, you were there from 1975 to 1988. Did you hear those rumours?
I didn't. And quite honestly, I don't recognise what she is describing.
And are you saying you just simply heard no negative rumours about Mr. Morrison at all?
Correct.
What would you have done if you had heard such rumours, Mrs. Mowett?
In the first place, I would have communicated with the legal department of Conservative Central Office.
Were you aware of any policies or guidance at the time that they might have called on to advise you?
I don't quite follow that question.
Well, let's say, for example, that you heard a rumour that Mr. Morrison was engaging in illegal sexual activity with teenage boys. Were you aware of any guidance about child protection or safeguarding that the Conservative Party might have used to advise you about what to do?
No, I wasn't aware of any such advice.
If you had heard rumours about Mr. Morrison engaging in unlawful acts of that type, would you have contacted the police?
Well, I would have thought that Conservative Central Office would have done that after my initial approach to them.
Rumours... Sorry, please say what you were going to say.
No, I was saying that difficult for me to comment on something that didn't happen.
Rumours like that can be very damaging electorally, can't they, Mrs. Mowett?
Yes, and as far as I've read in various documents, these were rife really around 1990. And I had moved south earlier.
Well, I've just shown you Mrs. Russell's evidence, which talks about these rumours starting in the early 1980s, Mrs. Mowett.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, she is mistaken.
Do you think if you had heard these rumours, you might have spoken to anyone, for example, in the Labour Party, and encouraged them to keep quiet about them, to protect Mr. Morrison's reputation?
I certainly would not have done that.
Let me, since you've got that statement of Mrs. Russell open, Mrs. Mowett, may I ask you to look further down the same page? It's at paragraph 8. And
yes, that is the paragraph. Sorry, that is the paragraph I read for the first time this morning, and I'm utterly bewildered by it. Well, it just didn't happen.
Well, let's just so everyone else can follow what's going on. Let's just look at it, please. About 6 or 7 lines down, we can see a sentence starting, "I do recall," and this is Mrs. Russell saying, "I do recall Francis Mowett, the Conservative Party's agent in Chester, requesting a meeting with David Robinson, the former Labour Party agent and prospective parliamentary candidate." Now, just pausing there, I think we've already agreed that he was the candidate in the 1987 election, wasn't he?
Yes, but what you have just read out, she is completely mistaken.
Well, are you saying that you never requested a meeting with him?
I am saying quite definitely I did not request a meeting with David Robinson.
And if I can just carry on reading, Ms. Russell mentions that Mr. Robinson is now dead and so can't tell us what happened. But just reading on at the bottom of this page and going on to the next, she says, "However, I do recall David Robinson informing me that Francis Mowett had told him there would not be a by-election and that Peter Ryerson would not be resigning, although he was not a well man." I think those were her exact words, as reported by David Robinson, and that he would not be standing at the next election. Does that help you to remember?
No, there was never any suggestion whatever that he would be resigning or creating a by-election. I can't understand why this has been said.
Let me ask you about another document, Mrs. Mowett, please, and that is in the same bundle at tab 4. Now, I know this is an extract from Edwina Curry's published diaries. I know you're familiar with this.
Yes.
Let's just call it up on screen, please. It's INQ 004107. Now, and if we can zoom in on the middle paragraph, please. So this was a diary entry that Edwina Curry wrote in July 1990, and you'll recall, Mrs. Mowett, it's about a conversation she had with Theresa Gorman, yes?
Yes.
And let's just look at it, and then I'm going to ask you about it. What Mrs. Curry wrote was that one appointment in the recent reshuffle has attracted a lot of gossip and could be very dangerous. Peter Morrison has become the PM's PPS, that's Parliamentary Private Secretary, isn't it?
It is.
And then she goes on, now he's what they call a noted pederast with a liking for young boys. He admitted as much to Norman Tebbit when he became deputy chairman of the party, but added, however, I'm very discreet, and he must be. Mrs. Mowett, from your evidence earlier, you'd never heard anything about that.
It's speculation that Mrs. Curry is mentioning.
Well, I'm going to ask you...
I don't know why she was saying it.
Well, I just want to know whether you knew anything about rumours that Mr. Morrison had a liking for young boys.
No, I haven't.
Let's read on. Mrs. Curry says, she, that I think must be Mrs. Thatcher, either knows and is taking a chance, or doesn't. Either way, it's a really dumb move. And then this. Theresa Gorman told me this evening, in a taxi coming back from a drinks party at the BBC, that she inherited Morrison's woman agent, who claimed to have been offered money to keep quiet about his activities. It scares me, as all the press know, and as we get closer to the election, someone is going to make trouble, very close to her indeed. Now, just taking this in stages, Mrs. Mowett, the description of a woman agent of Mr. Morrison's who had moved from Chester to Essex, where Theresa Gorman had her constituency, sounds like it may well be a reference to you, doesn't it?
That is what the inquiry assumed in contacting me this time last year.
Now, I know your evidence is that you were never Theresa Gorman's agent, but the fact is you were Mr. Morrison's, as Mrs. Curry put it, woman agent, and you did move around this time from Chester to Essex, didn't you?
I did. But what Mrs. Gorman is saying, I will go so far as to say it's a wicked lie.
Just to be clear, then, well, tell us what the wicked lie exactly is, Mrs. Mowett.
The wicked part of it is to suggest that I had been offered money, and secondly, merely saying that I was her agent is untrue.
Well, there may have been a confusion about whether you were her agent or not, but your evidence to the inquiry is that you were never offered money to keep quiet about Mrs. Morrison, about Mr. Morrison's activities.
Absolutely not.
I just want to ask you about one final document, Mrs. Mowett, and that I think you'll find behind tab 3 in the bundle, and it's cab 30123. Now this, Mrs.
Yes.
Mowett, you've seen this letter before? recently.
Yes, in January it was sent to me by the solicitor to the inquiry, drawing attention to one paragraph in it.
Yes. Well, let's just... I'm going to take you to that paragraph in a minute, but before we go there, let's just note it's dated July 1987, so shortly after the 1987 election. And it's a letter from a man called Mr. Walker at the Security Service to the Cabinet Secretary, Sir Robert Armstrong. We see that at the bottom of the page, don't we?
Yes.
And if we just look at the very first paragraph, we can see Mr. Walker explaining that he had briefed Mr. Morrison, and because at that stage he was a new minister, and that during the course of that briefing, Mr. Morrison...
Sorry, you would say the first paragraph?
Yes. It starts on the 19th of June. Do you see there? Just read it to yourself.
19th of June. Yes.
So, in other words, this letter arose in the context of briefings for new ministers, of which Peter Morrison was one.
Yes.
And the subject had come up of what Mr. Walker describes as a number of unpleasant rumours that had circulated about Mr. Morrison in recent years.
That is what Mr. Walker is saying.
Are you sure that you hadn't heard any of those rumours, Mrs. Mowett?
When I was in the Chester constituency, rumours were not circulating.
Or you didn't hear them anyway?
You could draw that conclusion.
Well, what's your evidence, Mrs. Mowett?
That I heard of no such rumours.
And you've also said to the chair and panel this morning that you didn't have a meeting with David Robinson, haven't you?
Correct.
Well, let's look at paragraph 5 of the letter over the page. Because we see here Mr. Walker recording a conversation he had had with Peter Morrison. And we see Peter Morrison himself mentioning the stories about his alleged homosexual behaviour, which surfaced in his Chester constituency during the general election. Are you still sure you didn't hear those rumours, Mrs. Mowett?
I didn't.
Mr. Morris, the paragraph then goes on. Unfortunately, his election agent, that was you, wasn't it, Mrs. Mowett?
I was the Conservative election agent.
Yes. In a well-meaning but clumsy attempt to spare Morrison embarrassment, had spoken without Morrison's authority or knowledge to the Labour candidate. That was Mr. Robinson, wasn't it, Mrs. Mowett?
If Mr. Morrison is alleging this, he is talking about Mr. Robinson.
Well, that's precisely what he's saying, isn't it, Mrs. Mowett?
Seemingly, but only Mr. Morrison knows why he made these remarks. I mean, okay, so I was legally appointed the agent, but I had 19 other sub-agents. It could well have been one of them.
Why would Mr. Morrison have been making this up in what must have been what he regarded as a private conversation with a member of the security service?
I don't know.
Just reading on, we can see that whoever it was who spoke to Mr. Robinson was a woman. He says she chose to do so in a back street of all places. Morrison feared that if his agent's approach reached the wrong ears, it could be misrepresented as an attempted cover-up. Are you sure it wasn't you who spoke to Mr. Robinson and tried to cover up the rumours about Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Mowett?
I'm certain.
Thank you, Mrs. Mowett. That's all the questions I wanted to ask you. I'm just going to see if the chair or panel have any questions for you themselves.
We have no questions. Thank you, Mrs. Mowett.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mowett.
Thank you.
Chair, the next witness this morning is Mr. Nichols.
Solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the
whole truth,
and
nothing but the truth.
Could you give your full name, please?
Graham Nichols.
Mr. Nichols, you're a lifelong trades unionist and member of the Labour Party.
I am.
You've supplied a statement to the inquiry, and we can see from it that you joined the Labour Party when you were 18, when you were living in the Medway towns in Kent.
That's correct.
And you served an apprenticeship as an engine fitter and turner at the Naval Dockyard in Chatham.
That's correct.
And it was while you were there that you became a shop steward for the Amalgamated Engineering Union.
That's quite correct.
And is it right that after that your career developed as a trades union official rather than as an engineer?
As a shop steward for the engineering union, there were about 9 in the department. I don't want to get too complicated, but
No.
9 in the department, and they elected me the convener of the shop stewards.
Yes.
So I was a senior steward in the Naval Dockyard until 1966.
So that's while you were still in the dockyard.
That's right.
Shop steward and convener, and then I think it's right to say that you left the dockyard to become a union official in London.
September 1966.
And that was for a different union, the National Union of Public Employees.
That's correct.
And you worked for NUPE in London for a few years.
6.5.
And then you moved to Chester,
That's correct.
still working for NUPE,
Oh, absolutely.
in 1974.
That's correct.
And as you had been in London, that was a working as an official for the union.
Full-time official, yes.
And did you have an area of responsibility for NUPE members when you were in Chester?
When I was in Chester, the responsibility I had was for the whole of the social services department in Cheshire, most of the education department, and all bits and bobs that added on. I covered the whole of Cheshire for that. But also, we had 2 officers' responsibility. We also broke up to have they had districts in Cheshire itself, and I had 4 of those districts, and I had to look after refuse collectors, street sweepers, etc., etc. The public sector workers in local government.
So your area of responsibility covered the whole county,
Absolutely.
more or less. Did you actually live in Chester itself?
I did. In a place called Hall, which is it became part of Chester, I think, in the boundary organisation. But Hall Chester is the official address.
And while you were there, you became involved in local politics.
It took me about 4 years because having settled in Chester, the time I got used to the organisation, I did say I took a family up there, and they were all very, very young children as well. I didn't have time until around 1979 to actually get involved in politics in Chester.
But as you say, there did come a time when you became involved.
Yeah.
One of the things we see from your statement was that you were the secretary of the Chester Trade Union Council.
That's correct.
Now, was that part of your, as it were, job with NUPE, or was it a voluntary post?
It was a voluntary post that I was elected to, because the Trades Union Council at that time was one man and a dog, and I took over and made it, should we say, a force to be reckoned with.
A force to be reckoned with.
Yes.
Tell us something about what it did and why it was a force to be reckoned with.
One of the main things that did for me was to, first of all, get all the local trade unions into the Trades Union Council delegates there. But we
Mr. Nichols, just bear in mind that the stenographer here is making a note of what you say. So first of all, if you can try and not go too quickly, but also if you can just be clear about what you're saying, so she can record it.
The Trades Union Council, we were in fact making. We met with Peter Morrison on a number of occasions to do with employment matters in Chester, because unemployment at the time was very high indeed. The lead works in Chester was closing down, so we met him to discuss that. We also got all the local firms, in conjunction with the City Council and the Manpower Services Commission, to organise an event in Chester Town Hall where all the local employers came and put their wares out, and people could come down and see what's been. We got the Manpower Services Commission chairman to come down and open it, which was, to us, was quite an event. We managed to get on a number of committees. As I say, we met Peter Morrison on a number of occasions. That was in my role as Secretary of the Chester TUC.
I'm going to come to Miss Morrison in a minute. I'm just trying to ask you a little bit more about your role in these various organisations.
Yes.
So that was the Trades Union Council.
Yes.
What about the local constituency Labour Party? Did you come to have an involvement in that as well?
Yes, I became a delegate to the local constituency Labour Party, the CLP, from my union, the National Union of Public Employees. That was my avenue in. Nobody from the Trades Union Council, could sit on the Chester CLP, as it was against national TUC rules to do that. So I came in through the National Union of Public Employees, and I became the delegate to the CLP, as I would call it, general meeting.
So just pausing there, you said the CLP, that's the Constituency Labour Party.
Yeah.
And so you had, we don't need the fine detail, but you had a post or a status.
Well, I was a delegate to it from my union, and I did become a press officer for the Constituency Labour Party in 1982-83, and I was the press officer for the parliamentary candidate. I don't want to complicate this, but the candidate was a David Robertson.
Yeah, well, I'm aware that there were two men, one called David Robertson and one called David Robinson.
I was David Robertson's press officer for that election, but I was also branch secretary of the local ward of Chester Labour Party, the ward we called Hall, and I was secretary for that as well.
Would it be a fair summary to say that you were very much involved in local employment matters and local politics in Chester throughout the 1970s and 80s?
Oh, well, very late 70s and the whole of the 80s.
Correct. Now, you moved to Chester. You moved to Chester in 1974. You've already told us that. And that was, in fact, the year that Peter Morrison was elected as MP for Chester. Tell us something about your memory, just in general terms, of meeting him and doing business with him during that period of time.
In 1974, he knocked on my door where I lived to try and get me to vote for him. But unfortunately for him, I was still had my ballot paper in Bexley in Kent, so I didn't get my vote. He wouldn't have got it anyhow, but I didn't get my vote. I didn't really get involved with Peter Morrison until the 1980s, when I took a more positive role in what was happening in Chester. Before that, I hadn't done so because I had such a big area to cover, and basically to make my mark. So it wasn't until the 1980s that I became aware. I knew he was an MP, but I actually became aware of Peter Morrison.
And in the 1980s then, perhaps with your role with the Trades Union Council, what dealings did you have with him and how frequent were they?
Well, so I met him not on my own. I met him with my president. I never met him on my own. When I went from Chester TUC, I only met him on my own when I went as a NUPE official. I know it's confusing, but that's how he worked it. When I went with the president, we discussed the unemployment situation in Chester we kept going back on many occasions to see him because unemployment was so bad. And after he became a minister, the local lead works, which is the only industrial complex at all in Chester, closed. And we obviously went to see him. And every time I have to say, he was very thoughtful, he was very careful, he was very helpful, but actually did nothing.
I think you were in court when Mrs. Mowett was giving evidence, and she said words to the effect that he was a very well-regarded constituency MP. People in Chester thought that he did a good job. What would your observation on that?
To use expressions, you would say that. But so far as I was concerned, he was very clever in giving the impression that he was doing a lot, but in actual fact he was doing little or nothing. But one thing I will say, on a personal matter, I did take something up for myself, and he was very helpful, and he actually did what I asked. Whether it's because of the positions I held, I don't know, but he went out of his way to help me on a particular issue. But
so on that occasion, at any rate, you would agree with what Mrs. Mowett said?
On that one occasion, but if you talk to, well, I only met him to talk about industrial matters, or I never met him to talk of political matters as such, but on industrial matters, I found him very nice to talk to, but absolutely unhelpful.
Just give us an idea, Mr. Nichols. We don't need to go into the fine detail, but you've talked a couple of times now about your meetings with him on what you describe as on industrial matters with your trades union hat on.
Yes.
How often did you meet him over that period of, let's say, the 1980s?
1980s, I would say a dozen times. And
just to be clear, did you say a dozen or dozens?
A dozen.
A dozen.
And once when he was with the city council councillors on an issue which he decided he wanted to sit in on while I met the councillors, but that was one particular issue, but otherwise about a dozen times over that period. But we had a lot of correspondence, or should we say not correspondence, we had a lot of say in the press to each other. And the press, if you look at that time, you'll see me and him were quite often attacking each other, so we didn't have to meet.
So just so we're clear, you say you had as it were, conversations in the press. Do you mean you would make a public statement and he would make some sort of statement in response?
Yes, and the other way round.
And reported in the local newspapers?
Yeah, mainly the Cheshire Observer and the Evening Leader, which was a daily evening paper.
Now, just going back to 1974 for a moment, Ted Heath was the leader of the Conservative Party at that time. And in the witness statement that you've given to the inquiry, you say that it was generally known, those were the words you used, that Peter Morrison's mother was the companion of Ted Heath, and that was somehow involved with him becoming an MP in the first place.
I think all I'm saying is that all I knew that he was a companion to Mrs. Thatcher. No, Ted Heath, sorry. He was a companion to Ted Heath. I suppose it was my opinion that's why he became the MP, well, not the MP, but the parliamentary candidate for the Conservative Party. Because as later on in the 70s and into the 80s, because I thought, as I said earlier on, I felt he was not a very good MP at all. And it then gave me more impression, the point I made here, that he only got the job because of who he knew, rather than because he was competent enough to do it. I don't think
I wanted to go on to ask you that more general question then. So, moving on from 1974 and how he may have been put up as the candidate, throughout his career and the time that you knew him, the time that you were in Chester, did you have an impression about whether his connections assisted him?
Yes, because he didn't, as far as I was concerned, he didn't do anything to help anybody or on industrial matters, which is what I was interested in. He didn't seem to do anything, and to have an MP like that, to get him in that position, he knew nothing. I mean, he spoke when we met him on one occasion. He would go off the subject we were there to talk about. And he would talk about he went to Eton and public schools. He would start talking about that, for no particular reason at all, but just to divert us away from the subject we were there. And to me, by saying those things and the connection that I heard he had, just made it even more certain that you would never have got that. You weren't competent enough to be an individual, to be an MP.
In your witness statement, Mr. Nichols, I'm moving on now, you give a very specific account of an incident at Crewe railway station and things that followed that. I'm going to come to that, but before we come to that, let me ask you more generally, over your years in Chester, the 1970s and 1980s, did you hear rumours about Peter Morrison's sexual life?
They were rife.
Rife?
Rife.
Tell us what you heard.
I heard that certainly that he had, I think the word they were using in those days, liked little boys. I think that's the expression that was used in that period. I didn't hear the word paedophile at all, but he liked little boys, and that not only did I know this, but I would say everybody what I would call the political elite of Chester knew of these, not accusations, but these rumours, if it's the best word to use, these rumours. Quite frankly, everybody knew. Nobody did anything, but everybody knew that he had a way for young children.
Just let me ask you a few questions about that, Mr. Nichols. First of all, you say that he was known for liking little boys. What did you understand by the term little boys? Are we talking, for example, about 16, 17-year-olds or younger?
No, I would put it around about anything from about 11 to 17, because things have changed since little boys were 17 or 18 then. They're certainly not little boys now. The social structure's changed in such a way that little boys takes on different meaning. But I would say, particularly, I heard it was a 15-year-old that was at Crewe station, and that was put down as a little boy.
I'm going to come back to that, but I just want to finish asking you questions just about these general rumours. How did you know what to understand by the idea of little boys? Did you ever actually hear, not talking about Crewe for the moment, we'll come back to that, but otherwise, did you ever hear of any particular cases? Did you ever meet any of the boys or their parents, or did you have any other evidence?
No, the evidence was the rumours that were going around Chester.
And you say rumours going around Chester. You've used the word rife. You talk about the political elite. Can you explain a little bit more about how these rumours travelled and who was involved?
When I moved to Chester, and I'd been working in the party for a little while, they just seemed to. We know about Peter. That was it, and that would be the way it would be spread around, like Chinese whispers. You'd sit down talking in the evening, perhaps even after a meeting you went for a drink, and then you start talking. That's how the rumours. I didn't know about that, and I would then say, "Did you know?" And that's how it went round Chester. And not just Chester Labour Party. It was, you know, the press. And the press certainly knew. So I had the chief reporter on one of the newspapers that I was very friendly with. I mean, she would talk about it all the time, you know. So the press knew certainly, and I knew, and said lots of them. I don't understand anybody who does it at a political level didn't know. I just found that incredible.
Well, we've heard Frances Mowett this morning say she didn't know anything about it.
Absolutely incredible.
Let me ask you a question, Mr. Nichols, just about your witness statement. I think you've got it in front of you. It's
yes, I have.
Behind tab 1 for the chair and panel. It's LAB 4038. And it's actually page 3, please, paragraph 6. You say here, Mr. Nichols, I became aware of his sexual preferences. And then there's a sentence I'm going to come back to, and then the third sentence, you say he was known for liking little boys. Well, that's what you've just said. But in the middle there, you say, it was common knowledge that if you had children, make sure he was not around them. What did you mean by that?
I just meant that he could be a very smooth talker. I think is the right word to it. He could be quite charming. And some people, or some mothers could, should we say, the charm could rub off and could give a false impression or make perhaps the parent feel secure. He could have, or did have in the early 80s, a very charming manner. He didn't have at the end because he was drinking too much.
Now, did you have children, Mr.
I had 3.
And was there any ever time when you acted upon that thought?
No, they never. My children brought up in shall we say, grew up and knew their politics.
I see. Now, Mr. Nichols, I want to turn to this incident you've already mentioned and which you discuss in your witness statement that arose from an incident at Crewe railway station. Can you tell us, first of all, what you remember hearing about the incident at Crewe railway station? And then I'm going to come on to ask you about meeting of the Labour Party and so on.
Yeah, well, that was all. There was a rumour going round, I'll say these rumours because that's all they were, rumours going round that something had happened in the toilets at Crewe railway station involving Peter Morrison and a 15-year-old boy. I read other areas where it says it was on the train, but whatever. I mean, I heard it was in the toilets and that came from the Cheshire Observer newspaper's reporter that it was the toilets at Crewe. And you want to carry on?
Tell me, how did you first hear about this?
I first heard about it when I was having a drink with the reporter from the Cheshire Observer, and Cynthia Boddy.
Yes.
And she just mentioned it, you know, because she knew everybody.
And did she relate this as something that had happened quite recently, or
yes,
within days or weeks? Or?
Well, I would say within a couple of weeks.
So that was how you first found out about it?
That's how I first found out.
And so it would have been after that then that you heard about it again at a meeting, was it of the constituency Labour Party?
Well, no, I don't remember it going to the constituency Labour Party. I'm not sure whether it was the executive committee or the campaign committee of the Labour Party that I heard it. There weren't many people there, so I know it couldn't have been the CLP. The CLP is usually quite well attended, and you sit in rows. I can remember sitting two sides and one at the back, like a square.
All right, just pause there, Mr. Nichols. So, just so it's clear in our minds, you've said how you first heard about this incident from your friend Cynthia, and then you heard about it again at some sort of a meeting of the Labour Party.
Yes,
and I think what you're saying is it wasn't a full meeting of the constituency Labour Party, it was some sort of
it was the executive or the campaign.
Okay, so let's not worry too much about exactly what
No.
group it was. Where was this meeting held, do you think?
At the Labour Party headquarters.
And can you help us with when this happened, in terms of, first of all, was it after the 1987 election?
Oh, yes.
But before the 1992 election?
Yes.
Well, that's given us a bracket of 5
Yeah,
years.
I said it honestly in my statement that I cannot remember the year that I was given that information. I've tried to remember, but I just can't remember. Unfortunately, I didn't. I now keep a diary, and I've kept one since 1992. It was a bit too late then.
Just
but
too late.
I honestly cannot remember the year and month when that this came about.
In your witness statement, you say that it was sometime between 1988 and 1990. Is that the best you can do?
That's the best I can do.
You've said that it was a subgroup of
Yes,
the
it was.
constituency Labour Party. Let's not worry about precisely which group. But can you remember, first of all, roughly how many people were there, and secondly, who was there?
I can remember Christine Russell being there, David Bobinson being there. I wouldn't have thought there was any more than about. Oh, come on. As a rough guess, a dozen. That's a really rough guess.
I think you, in your statement, you say Gwyn Cooper. Was that Gwyneth?
Gwyn Cooper. She was the secretary of the party, I think, at the time.
Okay. Well, can we go back to your statement then,
Yeah.
please? So it's the same document. It's LAB 4038. And if we can go to page 4, and Mr. Nichols, looking at paragraph 17. So we've missed the first few words of that paragraph, but that simply stating that the meeting was at the Labour Party headquarters, and we see in the first line or two you say who was there. And then this, so let's just pick it up from 3 lines down. At that meeting, Christine Russell stated that Peter Morrison was not standing at the next general election. The reason she gave was that Peter Morrison had been caught by Cheshire Police in a toilet in Crewe railway station. Just pausing there, presumably there was more to it than just being in the toilet. I think you've already said that.
I found it incredible that Chester Police were actually in the Crewe station anyhow, but there we go.
But you've said he was doing something. The allegation was he was doing something in
Yeah.
Crewe. What?
I presume, there's only presumption, that he was in there with a 15-year-old person, and he was caught in a sexual.
Why do you say it's a presumption, Mr. Nichols? Did you not hear from someone, either Cynthia Body or someone at the meeting, about that allegation?
I knew about the allegation. I said earlier on that I was given that information by the reporter on the Cheshire Observer.
I see.
That's when I got the.
So you'd already heard that
Yes, I'd already
allegation
heard it.
before the meeting.
Yeah.
All right. And then let's carry on in the paragraph. It says this: after we were told this information, Christine Russell stated that an agreement had been reached with the Conservative Association that Peter Morrison would stand down and the police would not take the matter any further. I know the local newspapers were aware of this arrangement. Just reading on, you then refer to your friend on the Chester Observer, Cynthia Body. You say, I did not at the time question where Christine Russell obtained this information from. And reading the next paragraph 2, paragraph 18, I do not know who at the Conservative Association or Labour Party met with to reach this agreement, but I'm aware that it may well have been Christine Russell, who at the time was the election agent. What I can say is that after I heard this information, no actual steps were taken by me. I may, of course, be wrong in my assumption that Christine Russell was in some way involved in the agreement or any linked talks. And let me ask you a few questions about all of that, Mr. Nichols. First of all, you end paragraph 18 by saying that you might be wrong about Christine Russell being involved. Do you mean that you might be wrong about Christine Russell being involved at all? So, for example, it may not even have been her who mentioned it at the meeting.
No, what I'm saying is that she may not have been at the meeting with the Conservative Association, and it seems to, evidence I've heard this morning, and it might have been David Robinson, but we were given the information by Christine at the meeting. I cannot assume that she was actually at the meeting where this deal was done. That's what I'm trying to say.
So you do have a memory that it was her who told you about it,
Oh, absolutely.
but you can't be sure whether she was actually involved in making
That's
the arrangement.
correct.
I see. Are you absolutely sure that it was her who told you about it? Because, as you, I think, know, she doesn't know anything about this.
Well, I could not make it up. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I've heard one person already deny all knowledge of it and all knowledge of everything concerning Peter Morrison. But to make a story up, this is why he's not standing in the next election. These are the reasons because of. And knowing that the press already knew about it anyhow, but the press weren't going to go along with it. Well, we're not going to put it in the papers. It happened. I just can't imagine. I may have some good imagination on some things, but on this particular thing, that's not the sort of thing I'd wish to have an imagination on.
All right. Well, you've told us, and the word you use in your statement is that this was an agreement.
Yes.
So who was a party? Who was involved in this agreement? It looks, from what you say, at the very least, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. Did you understand the terms of the agreement? What they'd agreed between the two of them?
My understanding was that we would that Peter Morrison would not be standing in the 1992 elections. And the agreement was if he wasn't standing, then we wouldn't break cover on this particular story.
What do you mean by break cover?
Release all the information that we had, or what happened at Crewe, hopefully into the local media. The local media wasn't at that time wasn't going to go along. Didn't want that published because there was a very strong relationship between particularly the main newspaper and the Conservative Party.
Well, you've already said that your friend on the Chester Observer knew about the story anyway.
Yes, that's right.
So were the press involved in this agreement too, that they weren't going to publish?
Yes, they weren't going to publish. She told me they weren't going to publish.
And was that because they had also bought into some agreement of this nature?
I presume they did, yes.
And what about the police?
Well, the police were the first ones to be aware of the incident that took place at Crewe, either in the toilets or off the train. They were the first people who knew about it, and someone somewhere then leaked it into either the media or into the two constituency into the two Labour Party, Conservative Party. I'm not sure, but the police leaked that must have leaked that information. There is no other way I can think it would have got out.
And I'm asking you about your understanding of the agreement or the arrangements that were made. But did you understand that the police were also involved
Yes, sir.
in covering this up and not taking any further action?
Absolutely.
And was that something that you understood from what Christine Russell said at the meeting?
Yes, it was.
Did that surprise you?
I wasn't surprised, and I'll be quite honest, I just took what was said. And no more than that. I never asked any questions.
Did you hear any suggestion that, for example, the Prime Minister's office may have been in touch with the Chief Constable about this?
I don't know that, but what I do know is that about the people who knew all about this, the Chief Executive of Cheshire County Council, Robin Went, he I believe wrote a letter to the Chief of Constable complaining that something should have been done about the cover-up of Peter Morrison.
Let me just ask you more about the Labour Party. It might sound odd to hear what you've said. I mean, after all, the Labour Party was trying to win this seat back from the Conservatives. It was a winnable seat, as events later years showed. Why would the Labour Party cover up a story like this, which one would have thought would give them a considerable advantage come the next election?
I really don't know why we decided to cover it up. I was not privileged to be at the top table and the discussions that took place. I'm not trying to avoid the answer. That I really don't know. I prefer politics to... politics itself can be very dirty, and I didn't really think this, myself that this would be helpful, because there could be other rumours concerning anybody on our side, and I wouldn't like the election to be fought on personalities rather than politics. I'm really not trying to avoid. I don't know the answer. I wasn't privy to the top table, so I can't answer that.
But you've already described yourself this morning as a force to be reckoned with in Chester. I mean, if you had disagreed with this, you would have opposed it. You could have challenged it.
I could have done, but I didn't. I just took the information that was received, and I was just pleased that he was standing down, and that was as far as I went with it. And we can all have hindsight, but at that particular time, I had enough on my plate with the things I was doing from one day to the next, and I think that's the reason why I just took it away.
Was one of the reasons why you didn't challenge this agreement because you could see that it might actually be advantageous to your party? Because, as I think you hinted a moment ago, if you challenge the Conservative Party about scandal on their side, they might challenge you about scandal on your side.
They might have scandal on our side, and then the whole issue would come out into the open if there was that, and politics would not be discussed. Morrison, I think, would still have held on to 1992.
So does that really add up to local politicians protecting each other from scandal, Mr. Nichols?
I'm very anti-establishment, as you probably gathered from. I always think that conspiracies are taking place. I think you'll find when probably later on when you speak to Christine, I was not very favourable with the top table of the Labour Party. I just found it annoyed me. I was not after any position in the Labour Party. I was quite happy what I was doing. I couldn't do any more anyhow. But I just felt at the top table at times infuriated me by not doing things, etc. And so I do think that the politicians in Chester City Council on all the side weren't that very good, and did not reflect the views generally of the people of Chester that I found through my associations that I dealt with.
But you were one of those politicians.
I was one of those politicians, but not a councillor.
But you could have done something about this if you'd wanted to.
I found it very difficult. I'll be honest, I don't know where I'd go. I couldn't go to... Well, I didn't even think about it, but I couldn't have gone to the press because the press weren't going to touch it anyhow. I couldn't go to the police because I was not in their best of books, because I'd written a pamphlet about the police in 1982, which resulted in one of my members in 1983. The police settled out of court for £12,000 because of this book pamphlet I'd written. So the police were not on my side. And one time the Chester Mayor accused the Chief Constable of being a racist, and I said, well, if he said what you say, he said, I agree, he's a racist. So, the police were not the people I could go to either. But I'm going to be clear, it didn't occur to me to think along those lines, I can't go there or I can't go here. I just left it on the table.
Did you think, in the middle of all this, about the 15-year-old boy, Mr. Nichols?
I did not. I just thought that's the story of Peter Morrison has been told. That's what they've decided they would do. And that was it. And it left my mind completely, because the whole incident at that time left my mind until a little bit later when we were talking about, this happened, Peter Morrison got caught. This was it. Peter Morrison got caught, has he? No, you're right, there was no mention of the 15-year-old boy. Oh, Peter Morrison's got caught.
Well, don't you think you ought to have thought about the 15-year-old boy?
I agree. Now, as things have turned out and we've found over the years, I think it's abhorrent that what has happened and what we allowed to happen. I knew nothing of the home in North Wales. I knew nothing about that whatsoever. And that came as a complete surprise when I found out. In fact, I didn't find out about that, quite honestly, until I got back to Kent. But looking back, yes, I think every one of us, not just me, everyone who knew, and there were a lot of people, I don't mean just the people meeting here today, a lot of people knew and a lot of people did nothing.
Because if what was happening, Mr. Nichols, is that what you've described as the Chester elite was protecting Mr. Morrison, you were exposing other 15-year-old boys to risk, weren't you?
I think it's fair to say that I along with everybody else, recognised when the story started to come out that was a time when we should have spoken, and we didn't. I have no idea what happened to Peter Morrison after the incident, because he was very rarely in the paper, if I remember, after that. So I don't know what happened to him. But yes, I think everybody, in hindsight, should have taken that into account and should have thought of other people that might in fact be involved. But we just didn't.
You mentioned earlier on in your evidence that I think someone called Robin Went, the chief executive of Cheshire County Council, wrote to the chief constable complaining about this.
He said, I understood. I did understand from him. I met him last year. I understood from him that he'd written to this hearing about the incident. But that's the information I understand from him. But my understanding was he blamed the police entirely for this.
And is your understanding that he wrote to the chief constable back in the day, back in the late 80s, or was it something that happened later?
I know it would have been. I think it was the chief constable might have been Finn. That was way back in the days when it happened. He thought it was an outrage that it was being held back. So what I'm saying is, the hierarchy of Cheshire County Council, the employees, and I know other employees who were in senior positions who also knew all about it. It was basically what I would call a Chester cover-up, if you like.
A Chester cover-up?
Nobody was going to break ranks.
Well, you mentioned the story starting to come out. As far as we're aware, the story of what you describe as the Chester cover-up didn't actually come out for 20 years or more until Simon Hoggart wrote his piece in The Guardian. Are you aware of there being publicity or press coverage about this incident before then?
No, he wrote in The Guardian a few weeks earlier a piece about paedophile Peter Morrison. I think it's in the notes there. And then I remembered, and I thought,
right, just pausing there, I'm going to come to that, but my question was whether you were aware of this story being referred to in the press before Mr. Hoggart's piece?
No, I was aware after he put that. My statement went in, and I'll come back to say that in a minute. I was aware then that one newspaper was in fact on the trail, and if you wish me to tell you how I know that, I'm quite happy to do so.
Well, let's first of all, let's look at the Guardian article. Perhaps we can call it up. It's INQ 003856. I think you'll find it behind tab 6 of your bundle, Mr. Nichols.
Yes, I can see on here. Yeah.
This is obviously a sort of internet printout. We can see just from the first page here, just below Mr. Hoggart's name, we can see it was published on the 16th of November 2012. Can you see that? Simon Hoggart's
yes.
name in blue, and just underneath that. Was that when it was published, to the best of your memory?
Yes.
So depending on your dates, that's 20 or more years after it happened.
Hmm.
And you hadn't told anyone, or you hadn't made any public comment about this in all of that time?
No, I'd left Chester. I had excuse me, a heart attack in 1993, which more or less finished me. As all my politics literally died at that time when I had that, and I've had other things wrong with me since then. So, I left Chester in the beginning of 1997, and I came down to Kent, and as well, and then I moved up to the London part of Kent, and then the article appeared. That was the first I heard of it.
All right, well, let's just look at the article, and then I'm going to ask you some more questions about it. If we can go over to the second page of this document, please, and zoom in on the last couple of paragraphs, more on the late Peter Morrison.
Yep.
This was a diary column, wasn't it, Mr. Nichols? So a series of little unconnected stories,
yes.
of which this was one. And we see Mr. Hoggart wrote, more on the late Peter Morrison, the paedophile who was also Margaret Thatcher's parliamentary private secretary. Graham Nichols, who ran the Chester Trades Council when Morrison was the local MP, wrote describing how he'd often met Morrison, who was by the 1980s pretty well constantly drunk. And then, in quotes, after the 1987 general election, around 1990, I attended a meeting of Chester Labour Party where we were informed by the agent, Christine Russell, that Peter Morrison would not be standing in 1992. He'd been caught in the toilets at Crewe station with a 15-year-old boy. A deal was struck between Labour, the local Tories, the local press and the police that if he stood down at the next election, the matter would go no further. Chester finished up with Giles Brandreth. That was the next Conservative MP. And Morrison walked away scot-free. I thought you might be interested. And then just, if we can just go to the top of the next page, there's a web link, and then this is now out of quotes. This was only a year and a half after his failed boozy campaign to save Mrs. Thatcher. Incredible that she presumably had no idea, and that such deals could be struck then. Now, Mr. Nichols, the passage in quotation marks which describes those events in 1990, was that what you sent to Mr. Hoggart?
I did send something else with it as well.
What was that?
And that was not for publication. And he published it.
Well, did you know Mr. Hoggart?
No.
Why would you send a journalist who wrote a diary column a juicy piece of information like that, asking him not to publish it?
I sent it to him as an aside. Actually, as an aside, it was an email, an aside to his. I would hope, put it this way, if he was going to use it, I would have thought he would say, come back to me at least as a journalist and said, can you give me more dates or something more, etc. He did nothing at all and just put the thing in the paper, and I just read it and thought, great. And
did, even 20 or more years later, you still didn't want details of this arrangement to be published?
No, it was a case of I just sent it to him if he wanted more information or if he wanted to talk to me about it. He had my email. He, on the top of it, made it quite clear, not for publication. I would have thought he should have at least said, why not? Never did anything. He just pushed it in the paper, and that was it. No reference to back to me about I'm putting it in, whether you like it or not, or anything like that.
Well, let me ask you that question, Mr. Nichols. Why not? Was it because you weren't sure about the accuracy of the account you'd given?
No, it wasn't that at all. It was to do with the fact that when I saw the first statement, and I just brushed the second one off, I was not well enough to be able to enter into any political discussion. By 2012, I was unable to participate in anything that was going on, any confrontational things. I was not well enough to be able to do that, and I still have problems. And I just left it, and that was it. And I can only, for want of a better word, put it down to the fact that I sent it because it's there, but just for that was it. Just for you might be interested, not for publication. I didn't expect to be put in a confrontational situation again, and I was not medically capable of dealing with anything like that.
I see. I just want to clarify your answer. You said that when you saw the first statement, and then you said you brushed the second one off. Do you mean the first article which prompted you to write the email? I think you've already referred to that. So there was an article that Mr. Hogarth, had already written?
Yes, you read it out just now.
No, what I just read out was what he wrote
before,
having received your email.
It says there more on
Yes.
the late Peter Morrison, the paedophile of Margaret. Yes, he'd written 2 weeks early about Peter Morrison and his paedophilia, and I then wrote that article. I was responding.
Yes. So when you said you'd seen the first statement, you meant Mr. Hogarth's first article. And as you rightly say, this piece starts with more on. It's obviously a follow-up to that earlier article.
Yes.
And just finally, Mr. Nichols, from me at any rate, we're now standing here in 2019, so 30 years or more from the events that you've described. Are you sure that this arrangement, this agreement in Chester really did happen in the way that you've described it?
As far as I'm concerned, that is what took place. And the meeting a small meeting of, I don't know if it was EC or whatever, it was a small meeting, that was the information that came out. And I was aware of the press knowing, because the reporter told me directly that the press weren't using it, and that the rest of it I came from the meeting that I say took place here. But I certainly had it confirmed, if you like, by the senior reporter of the Cheshire, the late reporter now, unfortunately, of the Cheshire Observer, who told me about and gave me this information.
And that's Cynthia Boddy?
Yes.
And she told you about the incident at Crewe, or about the arrangement?
Both.
Both the incident at Crewe and what?
Yes. And the pact that had been agreed, because the press were not going to print the story about Peter Morrison.
I see.
They had it and they weren't going to print it. I know later on you've got a statement from somebody else saying that the Wrexham Lead, I think it is, were going to print it but didn't print it. There was an agreement that keep it quiet.
All right. Mr. Nichols, thank you. Those are all the questions I wanted to ask you. I don't know whether the Chair and panel have any questions.
Just one clarification, please, Mr. Nichols. When you refer to the rumours circulating in the political elite and the press, did you intend that to include the Conservative Party?
Yes.
Also? Yes. So you were no doubt that local Conservative Party members were aware of it?
It was so rife I mean, if you're anything to do with any of the political parties, including I think it was the SDP at the time, if you were involved in anything to do with the politics, you must have known. You did know. Nobody can turn around and say they didn't know.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nichols. We have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. May I suggest we take our break now? We do have 2 more witnesses to get through before lunch, so can I suggest that we start again in 15 minutes at 22?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, I call Miss Jane Lee.
Okay, thank you.
Repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Ms Lee, you've provided the inquiry with a witness statement dated the 1st of February 2019. So we might make reference to that witness statement during the course of your evidence, but otherwise I'd ask you to speak from your own knowledge and recollection, okay?
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you some questions about your professional background. In 1989 and 1990, you were the secretary of the Gresford and Rossett branch of the Labour Party. Is that correct?
Yes.
And just to be clear, at that time, you were known as Jane Leach. Is that right?
Leach, that was my married name, yes.
Yes. And in which county is Gresford and Rossett?
It's in Wrexham, which is in North Wales, and that was Crewe. It's now Flintshire.
Okay. And how far is Wrexham from Chester?
About 7 miles, but it's another world.
Okay. And tell us, what position did Ian Lucas hold in the Labour Party at that time?
In those 2 years, he was chair and I was secretary.
He was chair of...
Gresford and Rossett Labour Party.
Yes. And what position did Peter Morrison hold at that time?
He was the MP for Chester.
Yes. And at that time, Miss Lee, what was your experience of Chester politics and Chester party members? You referred to it as being another world.
I had no knowledge of them at all. Welsh Labour Party is a separate entity. So even when we had big get-togethers, we had our own conference. So we just didn't mix.
Thank you. Miss Lee, in your statement you refer to a get-together that took place at a pub after the monthly branch meeting where you spoke with Eileen Nedermeyer.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you some questions about that. So just to be clear, that was the monthly meeting of the Wrexham branch, is that right?
No, that was a monthly meeting of the Gresford and Rossett branch. We'd had our meeting in, I think it was Gresford Village Hall. We used to alternate between Gresford and Rossett. There was a hall in Rossett as well. But I think we'd been in the Gresford Hall that night.
Okay.
Because we adjourned to a pub in Gresford.
Okay.
As we learned.
And can you help us, please, with the date of this get-together? So
Yes.
in your correspondence with police, I think you mentioned that you've narrowed down the date of the get-together between 1984 and 1988. But in your inquiry statement, you seemed to indicate that it was 1989 or 1990. So what's your best recollection of when it was?
I lived in Rossett until 1989, and then I left the house in Rossett and my then partner, and I bought a house in Hoole.
And Hoole is in Chester.
And Hoole is in Chester. It's the branch that I then joined. But I didn't join Hoole branch straight away because being secretary and there was a local election coming up, I wanted to stay on, help with the campaigning in Wrexham. We were a very new branch and we were very idealistic and we had real commitment. Anyway, so I stayed on as secretary in Rossett, even though I lived in Chester. I used to drive through, go to the meetings.
Yes.
I know that I bought the house in April 1989 in Hoole, so therefore I know that it was, and that I was only in this halfway position for a short time. So I think I know that that was the date. Can you hear me? Because I don't feel anyway. Go on. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. I think we can hear you. So your best recollection of the date of that get-together that you're referring to was somewhere in 1989 or 1990 when you were in that halfway position.
Yes. And I was a secretary, and there are minute books for the Gresford and Rossett branch. I kept the minutes, so it'd be in there.
Can you recall who was present at the get-together you referred to?
In the pub afterwards, well, I've tried to think. It was always a small group because there were the older members who didn't come to the pub afterwards. So I know that there would have been Ian and his wife Nora, Stuart Wiles and his wife Chris Wiles. We were the ones who set the branch up. So there was a core group. There would have been Peter Angel. He worked for the local council, but I think he was treasurer at that. Sorry.
Just pausing there. So Eileen Nadermeyer was present.
Eileen was there, but Eileen didn't come to
get-together.
meetings very often. She was a very random attender at meetings.
And who was Eileen Nadermeyer?
She was a member. She was a Labour Party member of the branch.
And she was a journalist.
She was a journalist on the Wrexham Leader.
Yes. Can you tell us?
And I don't know if that was her name, but it was Nadermeyer, Naderlof, Nader something.
Okay, so you don't have a precise recollection as to her exact name. Can you tell us what Eileen Nadermeyer told you at the pub get-together?
She said with relish, I feel ashamed. Anyway, I'll cry. She said with relish, get the paper tomorrow morning. She said, it's all set, it's typeset. We all went, what? And she said, Peter Morrison's been found in the toilets at Crewe Station with, I can't remember if she said boy or boys. And I'm still confused about that because there was either one boy or two. But anyway, and it'll all be in the paper tomorrow morning. Buy the paper. And I felt guilty. Sorry.
And just to follow up on that by the paper, did she mean the Wrexham Leader where she worked?
Yes.
So she told you that a story was going to be published the next day about Peter Morrison having some interaction with a boy or boys at the Crewe railway station in the toilets.
That day, she'd come from the paper. I think maybe she'd come from the paper to tell us, because and I feel guilty now, but we just thought, great, it's terrible, isn't it?
So
we're going to win.
Sorry, please.
Great, we're going to win in Chester. You know, he's going to be all over the front pages. We didn't use the word paedophile in those days, but that's all I thought at that time.
So you, the feeling in the group at the time was that this was a good thing because there might be some political gain out of it.
Absolutely.
Yes. And you mentioned just before that Ms. Nadermeyer had come from the paper and that the incident at the railway station had happened that day.
Yes.
Right. And did that story in fact appear in the Wrexham Leader the next day?
No.
Miss Lee, you say that you spoke to Ms. Nadermeyer again after the next branch meeting, which was a month later, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And you say that Ms. Nadermeyer explained why the story hadn't appeared.
Yes.
What did she say about that?
She said, and I can remember it virtually word for word, she said, the Chief Constable of Cheshire got a phone call from the Prime Minister's office. Margaret Thatcher's name wasn't mentioned, but it was from the Prime Minister's office, and had been persuaded to not press charges, but to give a warning, an official warning. And, well, we said, well, why didn't that go in the paper? And she said, and I don't know if it's true or not, but she said you can't report warnings. You can't put warnings in the paper.
But by warning, was it the word warning or the word caution that you heard?
I think it was warning. He was going to be given an official warning. And it couldn't be reported in the press. And that in return, Morrison wouldn't stand at the next general election. That was the deal.
Yes. Miss Lee, if I could just take you to your statement briefly. That's INQ 003993. I'll give you the page number.
Going to come up on here?
Yes, it's page 1 of the page 2 of the statement, paragraph 3. in your statement there, Ms. Lee, you've used the term 4 lines down, official caution.
Yes.
Do you recollect whether the word Ms. Niedermeyer used was warning or caution?
It probably was caution.
Okay, thank you. So Ms. Niedermeyer told you that there had been an agreement of sorts between the Chief Constable of Cheshire and the Prime Minister's office that the charges would be dropped. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And did Ms. Niedermeyer say how she had come to know about this alleged agreement?
Well, she didn't say how she knew. She just said that's what had happened. The story had been pulled at the last minute because of this phone call from the Prime Minister's office and this caution instead of a charge.
And you understand that the reason that it wasn't reported was, as she told you, that cautions or warnings could not be reported.
She said they can't be reported.
And did any of this appear in the Wrexham Leader or any other paper, to your knowledge?
No, not at all.
Okay. Miss Lee, did you raise this matter with Ian Lucas, who was at that time the chair of the branch?
Yes, I did. We always used to arrive at the branch venue early, Ian and I, and a sort of pre-meeting meeting, and I just said to him, after a month of thinking about it, I simply said, Ian, we need to do something about this. It's not right.
And what did you suggest that should be that he or you should do about it?
I didn't get a chance to suggest anything because immediately Ian said, I have done, Jane. I've rung somebody higher up and they've told us we just don't do that. And these were the words he used. For everyone they've got, we've got one.
Just to take it in stages, he said that he had rung somebody higher up.
Yes.
What did you take that to mean?
I didn't ask. I was so shocked at what he said that it was like I didn't say anything. I knew not to say. It was awful, really. I knew not to ask because it seemed to be such a serious statement. Not just there is one, and if they tell about us, our one, we'll tell about their one, but it was the fact that what he was saying was for everyone they've got, every paedophile they've got, we've got one. So it was so shattering. Because at that moment I knew that my party was in the same position.
Just pausing there to take you through some of the details. So you said that Mr. Lucas had rung someone higher up in the party and that you didn't... sorry, I apologise. You said Mr. Lucas had rung someone higher up and that you didn't ask what that meant. Did you understand that this referred to somebody higher up in the party?
Yes.
I might just take you to your statement again. It's INQ 003993, page 3, paragraph 4. And just in that paragraph, Miss Lee, again, line 4, you said he'd rung someone in the party hierarchy.
Yes. Well, that's what I mean by someone higher up.
Yes.
The party hierarchy.
But he didn't tell you who that person was?
And I didn't ask.
Okay.
It could have been as simple as, could have been John Marrick, who was the MP at the time in Wrexham, Dr. John Marrick. It could have been...
Just pausing there, thank you. Just to take these steps one at a time. So in terms of what Mr. Lucas had been told by whoever it was that he had spoken to, can you tell us what he said he'd been told?
The only exact words I can remember are the words, for everyone they've got, we've got one. I can remember those words precisely. He said something else before that to the effect of, we don't tell on them, and they don't. There's an unwritten rule. We don't tell on them, they don't tell on us.
And when he said, we don't tell on them, they don't tell on us, did you take that to mean the Labour Party and other parties?
Yeah.
And when you say because for everyone they've got, we've got one,
Yes.
what did you understand him to mean by everyone, we've got one?
Paedophiles.
Did he use the word paedophile?
No, we didn't use the word paedophiles at all. Nobody did in those days.
Why was it that you understood him to mean paedophile?
Because of the story of the Morrison being in the toilets with boys. That's what the charge would have been.
So help us with this. So you understood that Ian Lucas was told, in effect,
Yes.
that there was an unwritten rule that one political party would not expose a pedophile in another political party because every party had pedophiles in its ranks. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, yes. That was what was so hot. That was the tumbleweed moment. That was just the conversation stopped right there. I didn't ask another thing. He didn't say another thing.
Just pause for 1 minute there. Thank you, Miss Lee. Can you tell us how you responded to what Mr. Lucas told you?
I didn't ask and I didn't say anything. I kept it quiet for many, many years.
If I can just ask you,
Yes.
What did you do about it at that time?
Nothing at all.
Okay. And did you talk to Ian about it again?
Never.
Ms. Lee, I think you've seen the witness statement of Ian Lucas.
Yes, I have.
Can we pull up, please, INQ 004087, page 2, please? And if you could just zoom in on paragraphs 6 and 7. Ms. Lee, Mr. Lucas states here that he did not discuss the incident concerning Peter Morrison with anyone at Chester Labor Party or the National Labor Party, or indeed with anyone outside the group that evening in Gresford and Rossett. What do you say about what he'd said there?
Well, I'm disappointed that I understand that what I'm saying, he's a Member of Parliament. He was going to stand as a Member of Parliament very shortly after that. Dr. John Marrick was retiring. I just feel this was a chance for Ian to say, he's got 2 children. It was a chance for Ian to say, we did have that conversation. And I'm sorry that he didn't find it in himself to do that.
And can you remind us, Ms. Lee, who was the Conservative candidate for Chester in the next general election in 1992?
David Robinson.
Sorry, the Conservative.
Oh, the Conservative.
Candidate.
Charles Brandreth, 92.
And what did you take that to mean, that there was a new candidate?
I took it that Peter Morrison had stood down and that the story and that the facts, and they were facts.
All right, thank you. Ms. Lee, you've heard, I think, the evidence from Mr. Graham Nichols
Yes.
earlier this morning.
Yes.
And you've heard what he said about a deal being struck between Labor and the local Tories, the local press and the police in relation to Peter Morrison standing down. And you've seen the evidence that's been brought up on the screen about that. Do you think that that was the same deal that you had heard about from Ian Lucas?
The same deal. I think the implication is the same. Yes, I think that Graham was asked, why would the Labour Party in Chester do a deal like that? That's ridiculous. But if what Ian said to me is true, in other words, that for everyone they've got, we've got one, then it would have been mutually assured destruction, wouldn't it, for both parties? It would have been that moment, mad, like nuclear weapons, you know. If we know all this about you and you know all this about them, I can quite easily see why one party and the other, I hate to say it, but I think the only thing anybody could have done in those circumstances was to stay silent. If what Ian said to me was true, that he had spoken. I mean, I haven't overlooked the fact that maybe Ian has more political nous than I ever had. I just haven't got the makings of a politician. Thank goodness, sorry. But maybe he understood that all he had to say to me was, Jane, I've spoken to somebody higher up and they've said to keep quiet, and so therefore, and maybe he hadn't. I do not know. Unless Ian tells you that himself, we'll never know. But I don't think Ian would have said that to me. We were very good friends. We've never fallen out. I have the utmost respect for him. I know his family. I lost touch with him when Tony Blair became leader and Prime Minister because his politics are completely different from mine, and I didn't want to antagonise a good friend. We'd been so close.
Okay, thank you. You say in your statement, Miss Lee, that you had tried to forget what you'd heard from Ms Nadermeyer and Mr Lucas about the Labor Party's approach to paedophiles and any deal that might have been struck at that time. But you later reported it to police in 2014.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
And what prompted you to do that?
I think it was something like this. I'd spent all those years I'd spent thinking, how do I do this? Who can I tell? This is not right. Thinking of the children, really. Anyway, so at some point I suddenly thought, hang on a minute, why am I trying to find a way of accusing other people in this case? Because really I'm as guilty as everybody else. And that's when I had the idea that I could not give. I wasn't saying. I went to the police. I thought I'll give myself in. It's a conspiracy. I will go to the police and I will say, I knew about this and I didn't tell anybody. It's a crime. So I went to.
Just pausing there. Thank you. So when you said you would give yourself in and it's a conspiracy and it's a crime, can you explain why it was that you felt you were giving yourself in?
Because I was guilty of covering it up. Because I knew about this. I knew about these things, and I hadn't said anything.
Okay.
And I suddenly realised that I was as guilty as the people who do it if I cover it up.
Okay. Could we bring up, please, INQ 001664? I'm not going to take you to any particular reference, but this correspondence shows that you gave a statement to Sergeant Smith and were contacted by Inspector Marinari and Sergeant Bickle after you'd reported these instances to police. Is that right?
Yes.
And what did Inspector Marinari say to you about Peter Morrison's activities?
Well, can I say something about Sergeant Smith first? Do you mind?
Can I just ask you what Inspector Marinari had said to you about Peter Morrison's
Inspector
activities?
Marinari said, I was quite shocked to get a phone call because Sergeant Smith had been very dismissive. Anyway, she said we've had accusations against this man for years. She said, can you pin it down to a better date? Because at that time my date was between 80 and whatever you said at first.
You had said it was between 1984 and 1988.
Yes, yes.
So that's the date that you gave to police.
She said, we've heard so many accusations, and quite frankly, she said some of them horrific. I remember the word horrific.
Okay, thank you.
She was an inspector in professional services.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you say that you had told your sister and your daughters about your report to police, is that right? And what did your sister tell you after that?
Well, I told them exactly what I was going to do because I actually thought I might be arrested. So I needed them to know where I'd gone and what I was doing. So I told my sister the story of the incidents when Eileen told us what had happened. And afterward, a couple of days later, she said, well, she rang me and she said, after you said what you were going to do, she said, I Googled Peter Morrison. She used to read the newspaper every evening online. And she said she Googled it and it came up with a report in The Independent that said, she said, everything you said, Jane, but it also added that the police had been horrified. The police that arrested him were horrified and disappointed, and they'd best chance they'd ever had of getting him, catching him red-handed, and they were absolutely mortified that the charges were being dropped and this was being replaced with a caution. And at that moment,
that's all right.
Yes.
Just pausing there. You said that after you had told your sister what you were going to do,
yes,
as in you were going to report,
I told her the story that I was going to say, yes.
And you told her, as you've just said, sorry for speaking over you,
yeah.
you told her the same story that
yes.
you reported to the police.
And I told my daughters.
And so you were then surprised that your sister told you that she had seen the exact account
yes.
that you had told her
yes.
published in the Independent online. Is that
yes.
right? Okay. And later you say you looked for that article but you couldn't trace it.
Yes.
Okay. And what did you take that to mean, that you couldn't trace it?
Well, I'd knowing little of these things, I'd heard of super injunctions, and I just thought, oh crikey, somebody somewhere has pulled this and said it, and there's not even a trace of where it was. I just assumed that it was somebody whose job was to look out for things in the paper that might reflect badly on senior politicians.
Okay. And what did you think was, if such an article had existed,
yes.
that your
yes.
sister had seen,
yes.
what did you think was the source of that article?
I thought that the police in Chester had told the papers for no other reason than to add the details that they were horrified, they were disappointed that the charges had been dropped. They'd had the best chance ever of catching this man. It seemed to me that the only reason they would have for leaking what I said was either to warn the people that I was talking about, or to make the point that they hadn't wanted to go along with this. The police on the beat hadn't wanted to go along with this, and that's what made me think that Sergeant Smith had been instrumental in it.
So just to be clear, I think you said that you thought the story had been leaked by the police.
Yes.
Okay. And you wrote to the Chief Constable about this alleged leak, didn't you?
Yes.
Yes. If I can just pull up the response that you've provided to us. So if the trial director could just bring up the hard copy letter from Chester in a neighbourhood policing unit. Yes. Thank you. If we could zoom in on the third paragraph. So this is a letter
yes.
to you from the Inspector for Chester in a neighbourhood policing unit.
Yeah.
And Sergeant Smith is one of the sergeants who worked in that unit at this time.
Yes.
I'm just going to read from the letter. It says, as I understand it, the information to which you refer has been in the public domain for some years. That's the information that you say appeared in the article.
Yes.
D.I. Marinari has made inquiries and has been unable to locate the article to which you refer, and there is no evidence to suggest that any information was given to the Independent as a result of your meeting with Sergeant Smith.
Yes.
So just to be clear, Ms Lee, you don't have evidence to confirm that this story was leaked, but
no.
you thought it might have been because the same story appeared in a newspaper,
yes.
or you were told that it appeared in a newspaper,
yes.
and you didn't have another explanation for it. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
I also felt that Sergeant Smith's attitude towards the whole incident of me giving myself up was less than, well, I don't know how to put it. He first of all, he wanted to just talk to me in the office at the desk, and I said, well, I think we should sit somewhere private. Then I had to ask him, was he going to take any notes of what I said? And he then started to make notes. And at the end of the interview, he said to me, well, let me put your mind at rest, Mrs. Lee, whatever my name icon. You've done nothing wrong at all, he said. In fact, the only person that's done anything wrong here, as far as I can see, is the journalist for bandying it all about in the pub.
Okay. All right. And how did you feel about speaking to the police after these interactions and this article?
I gave up. I decided I was not having. They said they wanted to send two policemen to my house. I said, please don't send policemen. I already didn't want them in my house. I'll come to an office and you can take a statement. So instead they sent Sergeant Bickle, who knocked on my door and said, I'm awful sorry, I've got to cancel the appointment. I didn't check it with my colleague first, and she can't make it. And I think she wanted to come in. I just said, no, it's okay, thank you. I don't want to go any further, thank you.
Okay. And you then contacted this inquiry in 2018, is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Just to take you back, Miss Lee, just one further question. When you referred to your conversation with Ian Lucas and the phrase, for everyone they've got, we've got one.
Yes.
Is it possible, perhaps, that that comment, for everyone they've got, we've got one, was about outing homosexuals in the party as opposed to paedophiles?
I don't think it would have been, knowing my attitude to gay people and Ian's as well. I don't think we would either of us have mixed up the two, paedophilia and just being gay. I mean, you know.
Thank you. Ms. Lee, one gets the impression from reading your statement that you really wrestled with your conscience over these matters. So how do you feel about it now?
I just feel as if I don't think I can say it. I've said it already. We're all guilty. Everyone who get quiet. It's just terrible.
Okay, thank you. I don't think we have any further questions for you, but the chair and panel may have some questions.
No, thank you. We have no further questions.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Ms. Lee.
Chair, the next witness is Christine Russell.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Could you give your full name, please?
Christine Margaret Russell.
Ms. Russell, you moved to Chester in 1974, I think.
Yes.
And you describe in your statement becoming active in the Chester Labour Party a few years later, in about 1978.
Yes.
And you then served as the agent for the Labour Party for Chester between 1986 and 1992.
Yes.
And thereafter, you stepped down as the agent because you became the prospective parliamentary candidate for the Labour Party.
Yes.
And in the next election, which was 1997, you defeated the Conservative MP Giles Brandreth and became the Labour MP for Chester in that year, 1997. And you then retained the seat as an MP, serving until 2010.
Yes.
Is that right? I want to take you back and ask you, Ms. Russell, about some of the events that we've heard from other witnesses already this morning. Before we get into the detail of it, can you tell us something about the extent to which you knew Peter Morrison, let's say back in the 1980s, and your impression of him in general terms?
Well, I didn't know him terribly well. In fact, I don't think I ever had a one-to-one conversation with him. And I only actually recall being in his presence on 3 occasions. The first was when Princess Diana came to open the new hospital, and my daughter had had her name pulled out of the hat to present her with the bouquet, and he was present in the town hall on that day. The second time was Gwyneth Dunwoody, who was the former MP for Crewe and Nantwich, would organise on an ad hoc basis meetings for councillors in Cheshire with Cheshire MPs. And I can remember a particular occasion when Peter Morrison arrived very late for the meeting, quite drunk, in a very surly mood, and left shortly. Well, he was probably only there for 10 minutes. That was the second occasion. And the third occasion was at the Count in 1987, where he appeared very angry because the assembled press were asking for his comments on why the Labour Party had halved his political majority. And they were the only 3 times I can recall.
So only 3 occasions, all of them, I think, during the 1980s?
Yes.
And all of them, as you've described, public occasions?
Public occasions, yes.
Yes. Not private, and certainly not just the 2 of you together.
No.
And generally speaking, what was your impression? You described on one occasion Mr. Morrison may have been drunk. But
well, I'm being quite judgmental, but I always found that he was quite aloof and arrogant and actually just unwilling to engage with what he obviously considered to be the hoi polloi. But actually ill at ease with people. He didn't seem to want to engage and have conversations, even with people in his own party.
Now, hearing about that progression of roles that you had in the Labour Party, you were obviously, shall we say, at the heart of political affairs in Chester during the period in question. First of all, we heard Francis Mowett say that Mr. Morrison was regarded as being a good constituency MP. He was well liked in the constituency. And what would your observations on that be?
Well, you don't expect me, I don't think, to agree with Mrs. Mowett. He was quite an absentee MP. He was very fortunate in that he had a very competent constituency secretary, as well as Mrs. Mowett, called Vanessa. I don't know her name. I believe she may have been a relative of Mr. Morrison. Apart from him coming up to do surgeries, which were arranged, I think, by Vanessa rather than Mrs. Mowett, and maybe the odd function, he wasn't a very community-involved Member of Parliament.
Was it simply the case that he wasn't seen very much in Chester?
He wasn't seen very much, and also he wasn't particularly welcomed by active Conservative Party members in Chester, who I think were rather annoyed by the fact that back in 74 or 73 he'd been parachuted into the constituency and imposed upon members in the constituency.
And by that you mean he wasn't a local, is that?
He wasn't a local.
There was a suggestion in Mr. Nicholls' evidence that I think Mr. Nicholls gained the impression that Mr. Morrison benefited from connections in the Tory hierarchy, in the Conservative Party, his family, knowing well-connected people. Is that an impression which either you had or which was understood in Chester in your experience?
Yes, and it was quite common knowledge that he'd always been a supporter and quite close to Margaret Thatcher. I think he'd encouraged her to stand for the leadership.
Now, moving on, Ms. Russell, questions about Mr. Morrison's private life and in particular his sexual life. We've heard already from other witnesses today rumours in Chester, and in fact I took Ms. Mowett to a passage in your own witness statement. What was your experience, if any, of these rumours during the 1980s?
It was very difficult to know whether there was one allegation or 2 allegations or multiple allegations, because each person who was spreading the gossip would have a slightly different take on it. Some would say, oh, he'd been arrested by transport police at Crewe station. I think you have to remember that in those days there were very few direct trains from Euston to Chester, so travellers had to change at Crewe station and often had to hang around waiting half an hour or so for a connection.
So there was one set of rumours saying he'd molested a boy on a train and was taken off the train by transport police. Other rumours were he'd been arrested in the gentlemen's toilets, indulging in some sexual activity with young men.
In Crewe Station?
In Crewe Station.
So you're describing two slightly different factual accounts relating to Crewe Station.
Yes, and the third allegation that certainly was, doing the rounds, mainly I think from Chester councillors, Conservative councillors, was of his sort of wild parties he had at his constituency home. I think it was called the Stables in a village called Puddington.
Yes.
Where, it would be rather a select list of guests, and they would tend to be young men.
Can we just have a look at your statement, please? It's LAB 4037. It should be behind the first tab in your bundle, Ms. Russell, and I think the same for the chairman panel. And if we can go to the third page, paragraph 6, please.
Yes.
Now, just looking at that paragraph, you mention about halfway through the paragraph the rumours about Crewe Station.
Yes.
And obviously we've heard plenty of evidence about those this morning, and I think it's a common theme from everyone we've heard that those rumours related to a period in the late 1980s, 1988, 1989, something of that order. So that certainly seems to be what Mr. Nichols and
No,
Ms.
I
Lee
don't.
has said.
I think it was earlier than that. The early rumours that I was first aware of were actually about his drinking and his excessive drinking. I think those rumours were then embellished with rumours of his liking for young men more in the middle 80s, probably.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you, see, because the first sentence of your statement, you talk about Chester being awash with rumours about Mr. Morrison's private life, alcoholism, young men, from the early 80s.
Yes.
But if the Crewe railway station allegations didn't kick in until 1988 or 1989, there must have been rumours before that. And is that what you're explaining now?
Yes.
And that was alcoholism and also young men or something of that nature. And how well known, how widely spread were these rumours within the political community?
Widespread. Not only the political community, I would say, throughout Chester.
I'm not going to call it up, but we've got a witness statement from Giles Brandreth who talks about knocking on doors and people responding by saying that they had heard these rumours. Is that credible in your view? And what did you or anyone else do about these rumours during the 1980s?
I think because the allegations were coming from police officers, from Conservative councillors. I would say to them, well, what have you done about it? And it was, oh, well, he's being protected, isn't he? That was the common response.
Just pause there. What do you think they meant by that?
I think they meant either we have tried to do something about them, or we've tried to substantiate them, or we haven't bothered because we think it would be a pointless exercise.
So who do you think was doing the protecting?
Well, Conservative councillors would say, oh, he's just being protected from on high.
And what did you understand they meant by that?
I assumed that they meant... I mean, he was a Minister of State in different departments. And these rumours would have been before he became... Yes, they would have been before he became Deputy Chair. Yeah, I mean, that he was being protected by the upper echelons of the Conservative Party.
Let me, since we've got the statement up, can I ask if we can draw back on that paragraph and have a look at paragraph 8, please? Ms. Russell, you describe in this paragraph your memory of a meeting initiated by Frances Mowett between her and David Robinson, who was, I think, at one stage the agent for the Labour Party, but had become the prospective parliamentary candidate and was the candidate in the 1987 election. Is that right? And you really just there refer to the fact of the meeting and the fact that Miss Mowett requested it. If we can go over the page, we see your memory, and is this right? What you know of this meeting is what you were told by David Robinson after it happened.
Yes, I mean, if you want, what my memory is that it was during an election period. Now, whether it was the general election of 87 or whether it was the local elections, which were quite fiercely contested in 88, I'm not sure. But all I remember is a call coming through, not taken by me, from Francis Mowett to ask if David was there. And I think he was, or he came in, and I can't remember the sequence. But it landed up with him going out to have a meeting with Francis in a mews which ran between the Labour Party headquarters and the Conservative office. And David coming back and basically saying, well, Francis has just told me that Peter Morrison, because, you know, the press, you know, the former witnesses you heard, I mean, the press, every reporter on the local press knew of these allegations. And what David Robinson came back and told not only myself but other people were in the office at the time, well, Peter Morrison's not going to stand down, but Francis says they were on first name terms because they'd not worked together, but they'd been agents for 10 years, I suppose, together. That Peter was not a well man. I can definitely remember those words. She said he's not a well man, and he probably won't be standing in the next election. But that was soon. I think that was either during the 87 election or soon afterwards, because he was definitely the candidate. And you know, the joke was, well, why didn't you send Chris? And it was all a bit of a joke about, oh well, Francis is my friend, kind of thing. So he'd gone.
So you
So I'd never met Francis Mowett, ever.
You say that the content of the meeting was Mrs. Mowett saying that Mr. Morrison wasn't a well man, that he wouldn't be standing at the next election. Did you understand the meeting to be connected with the allegations against Mr. Morrison?
Yes.
So what was the connection? What was Mrs. Mowett trying to achieve?
Oh, I think she was trying to protect him against, cover up, if you like, all the gossip and the rumour mongering and the allegations that were everywhere.
So, and what was she suggesting to Mr. Robinson in that connection?
Well, I think she was naively assuming that, you know, if she was reasonable and assured David that Peter Morrison would be standing down at the next election, then, you know, in return, would we desist from joining in the accusations? But in fact, we were not making them. We were not making them.
Can I ask you to look at another document, Ms. Russell, please, and it's document CAB 30123. I don't think you do have a hard copy of this in front of you, Ms. Russell, but we can look at it on the screen together. I know you've seen a copy of this this morning. This is a letter from a man called Mr. Walker in the Security Service to Sir Robert Armstrong, the Cabinet Secretary. You see the date at the top, the 7th of July 1987, so that's a month or so after the 1987 election. And in the letter, Mr. Walker, the Security Service officer, essentially relates to Robert Armstrong some of the information that he, Mr. Walker, had been given by Mr. Morrison in a briefing. And if we can turn over, please, onto the second page and look at paragraph 5 of the letter, and perhaps zoom in.
Yeah.
It says, Morrison then mentioned, that he mentioned to Mr. Walker, the stories about his alleged homosexual behaviour which surfaced in his Chester constituency during the general election. That's the 1987 election, by context. Unfortunately, his election agent, in a well-meaning but clumsy attempt to spare Morrison embarrassment, had spoken without Morrison's authority or knowledge to the Labour candidate. She chose to do so she chose to do so in a back street of all places.
That was the Muse.
Morrison feared that if his agent's approach reached the wrong ears, it could be misrepresented as an attempted cover-up. Now, just to locate ourselves, if this was the 1987 election, Francis Mowett was Mr. Morrison's agent, you were the Labour Party agent, and Mr. Robinson was the candidate. And do you think this may be a description from Mr. Morrison's mouth of the meeting you've just been describing?
Absolutely, yeah.
Mrs. Mowett.
Well, the back street is the Muse. I refer to it as a Muse. It's called Muse.
Can you just give us a bit more detail about that? The Muse, the back streets, the lane. Well, tell us.
There's a major thoroughfare. In fact, it's the inner ring road in Chester, which is called Nicholas Street. And if you come out of the Conservative office and you turned, instead of going on to the main street, you turn the other way, there is, I think there's vehicle access, but there's a parallel street which is called Nicholas Mews. And it was a very wet, raining day. And Mrs. Mowett walked one way, David Robinson walked the other way because the Labour Party office was at the other end of the Mews, and they met in the middle.
From what you're saying, you've actually got a memory even now of that meeting happening.
Yes, because, you know, it got into local mythology, the meeting in the Mews.
Mrs. Mowett denied that meeting had happened, but you have a clear memory of it happening.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mrs. Russell. Now, moving on, I want to ask you about the arrangement, so-called, between the parties relating to the Crewe railway station allegations. Now, you know both Mr. Nichols and Miss Lee, don't you? Well, you worked with them in Chester for some time?
No, I think Mr. Nichols, in his evidence, said that his main priority was the Trades Council and his union work.
Yes.
Post the 87 election, I think it was, I set up a system of having local agents, and Mr. Nichols became the agent for the ward where he lived, and that was also the ward where Jane Lee lived. Yeah.
So you worked with Mr. Nichols. You were on some of the same committees with him for a time.
We had. Mr. Nichols he wasn't a ward delegate. He was a trade union delegate to Chester Labour Party, and he. Most months there were 3 meetings. There was a general management committee meeting, there was an executive committee, and there was a campaign committee. And I think the meeting that Mr. Nichols has referred to would have been in my relatively small office with the local agents. So it would have been quite a small meeting with probably about 8 people there.
Now, you heard Mr. Nichols give evidence. He gave his account, which was of a meeting in which you told the meeting that an agreement had been reached, that essentially the political parties and the press would cover up these allegations against Mr. Morrison in exchange for Mr. Morrison standing down at the next election. Now, what do you say to that?
No truth whatsoever.
Can you remember any meeting where something along those lines might have been discussed?
Well, certainly we didn't keep it a secret, the meeting between Mr. Robinson and Francis Mowett. So certainly people within the Labour Party knew about that meeting. So it was common knowledge that Peter Morrison was going to step down and wouldn't be seeking the nomination again. But equally, it was common knowledge to members of the local Conservative Association.
But you
it was
see,
no great secret.
One common thread between both what Mr. Nichols said and what Miss Lee said is that this was all prompted by the incident at Crewe railway station.
No, there's no truth in it.
Well, you say that, Ms. Russell, but can you explain why Mr. Nichols and Miss Lee have both remembered something that you can't?
I can't explain it. I mean, all I can say is that these rumours were common knowledge. I mean, I think a lot of the Crewe railway station allegations and stories came from the police. I was certainly told them by a police officer initially. It's certainly true that all the journalists on the 3 local papers were fully aware of various allegations, the Crewe allegations. It was certainly true that rank and file members of the Conservative Party knew. What I'm saying is there was no agreement to cover up. It would not have been in the electoral interest of the Labour Party to stop the rumours. I mean, but I very clearly, being a magistrate and all the rest, said to them, we can talk about Mr Morrison's very right-wing political beliefs on the doorstep any time, but you're not to go gossiping about the rumours. We have no evidence. We have no evidence. It's all rumours and allegations. And I was always very... that was always my advice. I mean, what people actually did when they were knocking on letterboxes, doors, I wasn't always there to hear. But there was certainly no deal, arrangement, whatever, at all between the parties. We had no means of... That was the only communication, was that meeting in the Mews between the candidate and Mrs Mowett. There was no other formal meeting ever between the Labour Party and the Tory Party.
Just going back to one or two of the things you said, Ms Russell, you said that the press knew about the allegations about Peter Morrison generally, yes? Also about allegations about Crewe railway station?
The press knew?
Yes.
Yes.
You mentioned 3 newspapers.
Yes.
We've heard, I think, about the Chester Observer, is it?
Cheshire Observer.
Cheshire Observer.
The Evening Leader and the Chronicle.
So
Chester
those were
Chronicle.
the 3 you've got in mind?
Yes.
And it seems to have been the position that none of them reported it.
No.
No.
No, they didn't report it.
Didn't.
There was no coverage.
And it also seems to have been the position that no one on the Conservative Party said or did anything about these allegations.
Oh no, they did a lot of gossiping, but there was
Nothing
no public
public.
statements. No.
It also seems to be the position that no one on the Labour Party said or did anything about them publicly.
We didn't have the evidence. We couldn't substantiate any of the rumours.
But it's true, though, that you, the Labour Party, didn't take any public steps in response to those allegations relating to...
I personally told our regional office and said, you should be aware of this. They knew, again, it was pretty widespread. It wasn't just within the walls of Chester that this information was known. I don't think I ever spoke to anyone at our head office, but I certainly spoke to regional office staff who were fully aware of it. The country was aware of it, because I think it was the time when Private Eye first started publishing stories too.
Well, but Ms Russell, I'm just trying to, leaving aside the idea of an agreement for the moment, I'm trying to see what the actual position was. I think we've agreed that the press didn't do anything about it, Conservative Party didn't do anything about it.
And I spoke to my regional officials to say...
But your Labour Party regional officials?
Yeah, Labour Party regional officials.
So nothing in public about it?
No.
Do you know what the Liberal Party politicians in Chester may have done about it?
Exactly the same, I think. I knew most of the key Liberal Party politicians in Chester because we used to meet very regularly on the planning committee. The key Liberal politicians in Chester, in the main, were councillors, plus Ralph Green, who was the parliamentary candidate.
And just pausing there, you knew, I think, someone called Patricia Green, who I think she was Ralph Green's wife.
Yes.
A fellow magistrate?
Yes.
And she and her husband active over quite a long period of time in Liberal Party politics.
Yes.
He had been a Liberal Party candidate in the general election, I think, quite early on.
More than once, I think.
And it's right, I don't know whether you've seen, I think you have seen this document, that Patricia Green also remembers events very similar to those described by Mr Nicol. Can we just have a look together, please? It's OHY 005914, and I think this is behind tab 6 in your bundle, Ms Russell, and also for the chair and panel. Tab 6. Yes, the interview. And if we can please look at the bottom half of the page. This is, just so you understand what this is, Ms. Russell, this is a record of an interview conducted by police officers with Patricia Green. And we can see 3 paragraphs down on this section. The Greens continued to have a keen interest in local Liberal politics. In the late 80s, they became aware that Peter Morrison had been involved in an incident on a train involving a boy. Morrison had been removed from the train at Crewe railway station. As she recalls, Morrison was travelling back from Westminster, her understanding that the boy in some way had been sexually assaulted. Green went on to say that she had no direct evidence and her knowledge came from rumour. Both the Labour and Liberal parties were talking about the information, which was so strongly believed that a by-election was going to be proposed. Green, together with the rest of the Liberal Party, were very shocked when nothing came of the Morrison incident, which did not even reach the papers. Green considers the matter was suppressed due to Morrison's privileged background. So there we have it from another triangulation point, Ms. Russell. Crewe railway station, a scandal suppressed by what Mr. Nichols would no doubt call the Chester elite. Does that help to jog your memory of those events?
No, I mean, I don't really think I need my memory jogged because I've got quite a clear recollection of what the rumours were, what the allegations were, and what I, as a responsible Labour Party representative, did with those allegations.
You're sure you still can't remember any meeting of the type that Mr. Nichols described where the Crewe railway incident may have been discussed?
No.
And you can't remember anything about any sort of arrangements, informal or otherwise, with other political parties in Chester, not to mention these allegations?
There was certainly no formal meetings with the other political parties. There was a lot of chit-chat between councillors, because I was one at the time, and councillors of the Liberal Party and the Tory Party. There was certainly, my recollection quite strongly is simply telling the members, well, I don't think they were the members, I think they were the campaign committee, the election agents, of the meeting between David and Francis Mowett, that there was not going to be a by-election. But contrary to what Mrs. Green says, I think that conversation was much earlier. It was nearer the 87 election.
It's quite difficult to marry up that meeting between David Robinson and Francis Mowett with the idea, if you just let me ask the question, with the idea of a by-election, because we can see quite clearly from that letter I took you to that it happened during the general election. So it doesn't seem that anyone would have been discussing a by-election in the middle of a general election, would they?
No. But the rumours persisted, and they persisted. And, of course, they grew stronger once Peter Morrison became Margaret Thatcher's PPS.
Do you think it's possible that something like what Mr. Nichols described, a meeting where the Crewe incident was discussed and some sort of arrangement between the parties followed, do you think that might have happened and you just, perhaps he's wrong that you were there, that it might have happened in some similar way but you never heard about it?
I don't think such a meeting would have taken place without me being there, because I was the agent. And I'm sure if there was any mentions of by-elections, then I would have been invited to that meeting. I don't think that meeting ever took place.
Have you discussed these matters in recent years with Patricia Green?
When this inquiry was first put up, I had a long conversation with Patricia. I still see Patricia quite often. And
yes, sorry.
We didn't disagree over anything I've said to you today or what Patricia really has put in her statement.
Well, let's just look for completeness, please. if we can look at INQ 004031, and this is tab 5 in the bundle, this is a statement that the earlier document we looked at was Ms Green's record of police interview. This is a statement she's very recently provided to the inquiry, you understand that? Yeah. And if we can look on the second page of that document, please, it's paragraph 7. What she says here is, I spoke briefly to Christine Russell about these matters when first contacted by the Met, which I think must have been within the last few years. She said that she was present at the discussion that Graham Nichols described when it was agreed that Peter Morrison should stand down. At that point, it was also agreed not to pursue other matters concerning Peter Morrison's previous conduct. Now, reading on, it says she didn't talk about the Crewe incident or the date when the discussion about when a possible by-election might take place. As I remember, that's when, as Patricia Green remembers, this happened after the Crewe incident, when we understood the police had been involved. So what Mrs Green seems to be suggesting there is that you do have a memory of a meeting that Graham Nichols described, when it was agreed, first of all, that Peter Morrison would stand down, and secondly, that you wouldn't pursue matters against him. So she's got it wrong, has she?
She's got it wrong, yes. I probably, in conversation with her, just related what I've said to you today, which was about the meeting between Francis Mowett and David Robinson, and the fact that we were then told that Peter Morrison would be standing down at the subsequent election, which of course didn't happen until 1992.
Well, Ms Russell, if you did speak to Mrs Green about a meeting between David Robinson and Francis Mowett, why does she not say anything about either David Robinson or Francis Mowett in this statement, and why does she instead say that you told her you were present at the discussion that Graham Nichols described when it was agreed that Peter Morrison would stand down and that you wouldn't pursue other matters concerning his previous conduct? They're two different incidents, aren't they?
They're two different things,
So why, if what you told her was about Francis Mowett and David Robinson, why is she describing something completely different?
Or she's mistaken. She possibly misunderstood, to give her the benefit of the doubt. She probably misunderstood what I was saying to her in the recent telephone conversation she's referring to.
So what it boils down to, Ms Russell, is this, that Patricia Green, Mr Nichols, Miss Lee have all provided evidence, not exactly the same, but all provided evidence of an incident at Crewe railway station leading to discussions between the parties, leading to an agreement that...
There wasn't any discussions between the parties.
Well,
there may have been individual conversations between members of different political parties, but there were no formal discussions. I'm sure I would have been aware of them. I wasn't the constituency chair at the time, but there were no formal discussions. I'm quite convinced of that.
Well, the difficulty for the chair and panel, Ms Russell, is that, very broadly speaking, those other three witnesses all give evidence to one effect, and you're simply saying that didn't happen. How are they going to reconcile that, do you think?
Well, it's I'm just telling you the truth, and that is what happened. I think there may be... I think there's a confusion that, in fact, the conversation between Francis Mowett and David Robinson happened much sooner. I think there's an assumption that that kind of preempted Peter Morrison standing down in about, I don't know when it happened, when he announced he wasn't standing again. It was probably 1990 by then. And don't forget, the rumours had carried on from when he was re-elected in 87. The rumours carried on right up until he finally announced, or it was announced, that he wasn't seeking re-election.
I just want to pursue something you said a moment ago. As I understood it, you suggested that because of your role as election agent, any formal arrangement, any formal agreement between the political parties you would have had to have heard about or been involved with. Do you think it's possible that something like what Mr Nichols, Miss Lee, Mrs. Green all seem to remember, may have happened, but happened on a less formal basis, and so you might not have been aware of it.
No.
You heard Miss Lee give evidence a few moments ago about her conversation with Mr. Lucas when she challenged the idea that nothing was going to be said about the allegations about Mr. Morrison, and the answer she got was, "For everyone they've got, we've got one." Does that ring a bell with you, either those words or that sentiment?
No, the words don't. The words don't ring any bells. But certainly, again, it was rumours that the higher echelons of all the political parties were. Don't forget, this was the time when you'd had the AIDS hysteria. The age of consent for gay people was still 21, there was absolutely no one disputing Morrison's homosexuality, absolutely no one in Chester within the Tory party. And there were rumours, but again, they were not rumours that I can substantiate to you today, that there were discussions. I wouldn't go as whether they were agreements or whether they were just discussions between representatives of the political parties at the highest level of those political parties. There was gossip in private eye virtually every week of, Labour MPs, Tory MPs. I'm not sure if there were any Liberal MPs mentioned. I'm sure there were. But I can remember by-elections with candidates who were obviously gay, where there was a horrible undercurrent of homophobic comments going around.
Ms. Russell, thank you very much. I don't have anything more to ask you. I don't know whether the Chair or panel have any questions.
Sir Malcolm.
Thank you. Could I just pick up really on the last point that you were making and tie it back to a number of points that you've been making across your statement. We've clearly seen some reference to records of a conversation that took place after the 1987 election by Peter Morrison himself relating to a conversation. Would this have been about the incident at Crewe or other allegations concerning homosexual behaviour, conduct, etc.? I notice in your statement also you refer to alcoholism and a penchant for young men, which is something that you carefully say throughout that. And yet I also notice that in the statement of Mr. Nichols, it is said it was known for liking little boys. I'm wondering if you could shed any light on your understanding of the prevalence of rumours concerning a liking for little boys and what you meant in the context of discussing young men.
No one within my hearing ever said little boys. It was always young men. But the age of consent was 21 at the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frank.
Just one matter, please. You described the difference between you and Patricia Green. That you said you thought there may have been a misunderstanding on her part. Do you remember saying that? You thought she may have misunderstood what you'd said to her.
It's possible, or she conflated different parts of.
Can I just ask you then?
Of a lengthy conversation with her.
What do you think that you said to her that you think that she may have misunderstood? That I actually said that David Robinson had said that the reason Morrison was going to stand down was because of the allegations around what may or may not have happened in the vicinity of Crewe station or on a train to Crewe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Russell. Just before we break for lunch, Chair, Ms. O'Byrne is simply going to invite you to adduce some further evidence which relates to these topics that we've been hearing evidence about this morning.
Chair, we ask you to adduce a number of documents. I won't bring them up, but I'll summarise them very briefly. The first document is INQ 004087, the statement of Ian Lucas, to which you've heard reference today. Mr. Lucas remembers Jane Lee as Jane Leach. He recalls being at the pub after a branch meeting in 1988 or 1989 when a member he calls Eileen Niederloff, who was a journalist, told the group that Peter Morrison had been arrested at Crewe railway station for some form of sexual offence. And you've seen reference already to Mr. Lucas's denial that he spoke to anyone in the Chester Labor Party or in the National Labor Party about that at the time. The second document is the record of interview of Patricia Green, OHY 005914. It describes her as the informant in relation to the report that Peter Morrison was taken off a train at Crewe railway station. And you have again seen reference to that document and to her statement, which is the next document we'd ask you to adduce at INQ 004031. Mr. O'Connor has referred to those documents. The next document is BTP 000001, the statement of Detective Superintendent Gary Richardson of British Transport Police. DS Richardson responds to the inquiry's request for any documents held by British Transport Police in relation to Peter Morrison MP regarding his arrest at Crewe railway station between 1980 and 1990 for molesting boys. And aside from one nominal record not related to a crime or intelligence record, the statement says that other searches have not revealed any records. We then ask you to adduce OHY 006997. This is the statement of Detective Chief Superintendent Denise Worth on behalf of Cheshire Police. She states that searches have been conducted to establish whether Cheshire Constabulary had any information relating to allegations that Peter Morrison MP was arrested for any matters in Cheshire, or that anyone may have intervened to prevent the matter from reaching the media, and she reports that no records have been located. And Chair, you'll recall Mr Mahaffy's evidence last Tuesday that searches had been commissioned in relation to Operation U that also did not locate any records. The last document is OHY 003183, which is notes and correspondence concerning searches conducted by Cheshire Constabulary in relation to allegations concerning Peter Morrison, including those made by Jane Lee and Barry Stevens, about which you'll hear tomorrow, Chair. So, Chair, we invite you to adduce all those documents in full. And that, I think, concludes the morning's evidence.
Thank you, Mr Byrne. We'll now take the lunch break and return at 2.